3 months after my mother's funeral, my brother Marcus sat across from me at her kitchen table and slid a document across the wood and asked me to sign it. I smiled. I told him I needed a few days to look it over. He said, of course. He said there was no rush. He said he just wanted to get things sorted so we could both move forward. He said it the way he said most things: warm, patient, reasonable. The voice of a man who had already decided how the conversation was going to end. He drove away in a car I hadn't seen before. Dark gray. New. The kind of car that costs more than it should when you have just buried your mother 3 months ago. I noticed that. I filed it away, and I drove home. I went to my bedroom. I took down the photograph of my mother and me from 1987, the one from the beach in Florida, the one I had kept on my dresser for 30 years, because her laugh in that photo was the truest version of her laugh I had ever seen captured on film, and I turned it over. Taped to the back, flat against the cardboard, wrapped in a small square of tissue paper so it wouldn't create a bump, was a flash drive. She had told me it would be there. 2 years earlier, sitting at her kitchen table, with a cup of tea going cold between her hands, she had looked at me very directly and said, "Baby, if your brother ever comes to you with papers and asks you to sign anything at all, you go find that drive first. It's behind the beach photo, the one on your dresser. Don't sign a single word until you see what's on it." I had asked her what she meant. She had said, "I mean exactly what I said." And then she had changed the subject, the way she did when a conversation was finished. I plugged the drive in on a Monday morning, alone at my kitchen table, with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and what my mother had spent the last 2 years of her life quietly building while her kidneys were failing and her son was counting her furniture was the most thorough act of love I have ever witnessed. Before we go any further, some names and details in this story have been changed, but everything you are about to hear is real. If you have ever been protected by someone who loved you more carefully than you knew, stay with me. This one is for you. My mother's name was Vivian. She was 68 years old when she died, and she was the kind of woman who expressed love through actions so consistently and so quietly that most people around her had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a light that is always on. She had worked as a school librarian for 27 years. She remembered every child's reading level long after they had graduated and moved on. She kept a garden she tended every morning before breakfast, without fail. She wrote birthday cards by hand, always, with something specific inside, not just a signature, but a sentence that told you she had been paying attention to your life. She was also, in her last 2 years, dying. A slow kidney disease that took more of her every month while she continued to tend the garden and write the cards and remember the names. She managed it with the same quiet discipline she brought to everything: her medication schedule, her doctor's appointments, the careful way she monitored what she ate and drank. She did not complain. She did not perform her illness for sympathy. She just kept going. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me. He lives on the north side of the city, in a house that has always been slightly larger than necessary and slightly beyond what his income should have allowed. I noticed that over the years without ever examining it closely, the way you notice something about a person you love and choose not to pull on the thread. When my mother got sick, Marcus started coming around more. At first, it felt like exactly what it looked like: a son stepping up, Sunday visits, offers to drive her to appointments, a new habit of asking careful questions about her finances, her accounts, her paperwork, making sure nobody was taking advantage of her now that she was older and alone. My mother told me once, about 8 months before she died, what she actually thought about those visits. We were sitting at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, and she said it without preamble, without drama, looking into her tea. "Diane, your brother is counting something. Every time he comes over, I can see him doing it. He looks at the house and he counts." I told her she was imagining things. She looked at me for a moment and said, "I raised that boy. I know when he's counting." I let the conversation go because she was sick and I wanted her days to feel safe, and I did not want to add weight to what she was already carrying. She did not let it go. She just got quiet, and she got to work. The drive held 4 folders. The first was labeled "Read This First." Inside was a voice recording, her voice. I recognized it before she said a single word. Just the creak of her kitchen chair and the sound of her clearing her throat, the way she always did before saying something she had been thinking about for a long time. She said, "Diane, baby, if you're listening to this, it means Marcus finally made his move. I'm sorry I couldn't be there when it happened. I'm sorry I couldn't just sit you both down and say what needed saying while I was still alive to say it. But you know your brother. You know how that conversation would have gone. So I did it this way instead. Everything you need is in these folders. Don't be scared. I made it simple." I sat at my kitchen table and listened to my dead mother tell me not to be scared. The second folder was labeled "The Account." My mother had kept her finances simply her entire life. One checking account, one savings account, a retirement fund from the school district, and a small investment account she and my father had opened together in 1991 and left untouched to grow. Total value at the time of her death was just over $290,000. The folder held 18 months of bank statements. Every transaction she had not made herself was highlighted in yellow. There were 23 of them, small amounts at first, 200, 300, moved through online transfers she said she had not set up and did not recognize. Then larger, 800, 1,200. One transfer in March for $4,200 that went to an account she had highlighted in red and labeled in her careful handwriting, "Marcus's personal account." I called the bank. I confirmed it. She had called the bank herself. 70 years old, kidneys failing, sitting at that kitchen table with a telephone in her hand, calling her bank, confirming that her son had been moving her money to his own account, writing it down so I would have it. The total across 18 months was $38,400. The third folder was labeled "The Papers Marcus Will Bring." She knew. She knew he would come with documents. She had anticipated it so completely that she had gotten there first. Inside was a summary of her updated will, revised the previous October, 8 months before she died, along with a note from her attorney explaining that any document purporting to transfer property, accounts, or legal authority signed after that date and not witnessed by her attorney was not valid and should be considered suspect. She had closed the door before he could walk through it. The fourth folder was labeled "For You," a letter, 3 pages, her handwriting, the same handwriting from 30 years of birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on the kitchen counter. She wrote that she was not angry at Marcus, that she had spent a long time deciding how to feel, and that was where she had arrived. Not angry, just clear. She wrote that she had always known he measured things, people, what he was owed versus what he had. She said she thought it came from fear, not cruelty, but that fear was not an excuse, and love was not a reason to leave me without protection. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in slightly larger letters, underlined once, she had written, "You were always the one who showed up, baby. This is me showing up for you one last time." I sat on my kitchen floor and finished reading. Then I closed the laptop. I sat for a moment and I called her attorney. Comment "she knew" if you're still here, because what her attorney had already prepared and what happened when Marcus called expecting my signature, that is where this story turns. Stay with me. Her attorney's name was Susan Park. She answered on the second ring. She said, "Diane, I've been expecting your call. Your mother said it might take a little while before you found the drive. She said you were the kind of person who needed to be ready before you moved." That was my mother, exactly. Even in her instructions to her attorney, she had described me accurately. Susan told me that my mother had come to her office the previous October, alone, by bus, because she had not wanted to ask me for a ride and have to explain where she was going. She had sat down across from Susan and laid everything out methodically. The bank statements, the transfer records, the pattern of withdrawals that had started almost exactly when Marcus began visiting regularly. She had done her research before she walked through Susan's door. Susan had updated the will, she had prepared a formal record of the unauthorized transfers for potential legal action, she had drafted a letter to Marcus's attorney because she had known, my mother had known that Marcus would have an attorney, that was ready to send the moment he made a formal move. She had also filed a complaint with the State Elder Financial Abuse Unit in December, 4 months before my mother died, attaching the bank records as supporting documentation. The investigation had been open for 3 months by the time Marcus slid those papers across the table. He had no idea. Susan said, "Your mother was the most prepared client I have ever worked with. She came to me twice. She never cried. She just sat across from me and handed me documents and asked what else she needed." I thought about my mother taking the bus to a lawyer's office, alone, with her folder of bank statements, while her kidneys were failing. I told Susan I was ready. She said, "Good, because Marcus's call to your attorney is already overdue." Marcus called me on a Sunday. He said he'd been thinking about the paperwork. He said he just needed my signature to close out the estate, and then everything could be settled cleanly. He said it warmly, patiently, the voice of a man managing a simple and routine situation. He said, "You know Mom would have wanted this simple." I let him finish. Then I said, "Marcus, I found the drive." The line went quiet. Not the quiet of confusion, the specific quiet of a man who has just heard something he hoped he would never hear and is now calculating exactly how bad it is. I said, "I found the bank statements. I found the transfers. I found your account number in her handwriting. And I found the letter she left with Susan Park, who has been waiting for your attorney's call for 3 months. He said he could explain it. I said you should explain it to the Elder Financial Abuse Unit. They have been investigating since December. He didn't say anything after that. I told him not to contact me again except through an attorney, and I hung up. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet that followed, and I thought about my mother sitting at her own kitchen table doing it all. The phone calls to the bank, the bus ride to Susan's office, the voice recording, the tissue paper wrapped around the drive so it would lie flat behind the frame. All of it done carefully, quietly, without telling me, because she knew that if she told me I would worry, and she did not want her last months shadowed by my fear. She did it all so I would not have to be afraid. The legal process took 7 months. Marcus did not contest the elder abuse finding. Susan's documentation, combined with the state investigation, made it contesting it a losing position, and his attorney told him so clearly enough that he listened. The $38,400 was returned in full. The estate was distributed according to my mother's updated will, which was clean and unambiguous, and in Susan's words, essentially bulletproof. Marcus and I have not spoken since that Sunday phone call. I still have the flash drive. It sits in the top drawer of my dresser now, next to the photograph of my mother and me from the beach in 1987, the one where her laugh is the truest version of her laugh I have ever seen. I look at that photograph sometimes, and I think about a woman who was 68 years old and running out of kidneys and took a bus alone to a lawyer's office and laid her bank statements on the desk and said quietly, without crying, "What else do I need?" She knew the answer before she asked. She just wanted to make sure she hadn't missed anything. That was who she was. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because somewhere right now there is a woman sitting at a kitchen table doing exactly what my mother did, paying attention, keeping records, making sure the person she loves will have what they need in the version of the future where she can no longer hand it to them directly. Those women are not helpless. They are the most careful people in any room they have ever entered. My mother tended a garden every morning. She remembered children's names for decades after they had moved on. She wrote birthday cards by hand with something specific inside every single time. She also took a bus to a lawyer's office alone with a folder of bank statements while her kidneys were failing and made absolutely sure her daughter would never have to sign something she didn't understand. Do not underestimate quiet women. Do not mistake their softness for unawareness. Do not assume that because they love without condition, they trust without limits. My mother loved Marcus. She also knew exactly who he was. Both of those things were true at the same time, and she lived with both of them, and she built her plan around both of them, and she got it exactly right. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Has someone ever left you something you didn't understand until the exact moment you needed it most? Tell me in the comments, because I think the people in this room understand something about quiet love that is very hard to explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. This is Silent Rank. I'll see you in the next one.